we are here to discuss about the challenges and best practices for internet regulation in Africa and Latin America. I have the privilege to be with a very interesting panel here, and I would like to give the floor. I'm Pedro Lesandrade. I'm Senior Policy Counsel at Google. I'm in charge of public policy and government affairs for Spanish-speaking Latin America, and also coordinating our team here at the IGF. Joanna Baron is the other co-chair of this session. She's a researcher at the Center for Technology and Society, CTS-FGV, of Fundación Getúlio Vargas de Brazil. And she will introduce all the speakers on this workshop. The idea is to have very brief interventions of the speakers and really open up the discussion for the floor here. We are going to limit our presentations to 6 minutes. I'm going to be try to keep the time here. So sorry if I have to quote you. It's not personal.
Not for the content.
Huh?
And not for the content.
Not for the content. We really support free expression here. Please, Joanna, introduce the panelist.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you all for coming. So in our panel, we'll have Alex Gakuru, Chairman of the Internet Consumers Associations of Kenya, Lillian Nawala from CIPESA, Alex Comminus from the University of Gießen, Eduardo Bertone from Director of the Center for Studies on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information at Palermo University. I just want to bring some points and some questions that we could develop throughout our discussions here. I think that what we had in mind about this panel was thinking about the regulation, that the wave of regulations concerning internet now we are facing. If we focus in Latin America and Africa in the perspective of self-cooperations and challenges, could Latin America and Africa be explored as for their positive experiences, challenges, and paths for collaboration to guarantee an accessible, free, open, secure internet where human rights are guaranteed and respected. When I think about internet regulations, I like to think like in this graphic. I believe that if you want to secure an environment, a democratic environment in the internet, open to innovation and for citizens to express themselves and to improve democracy, I think we have those main topics to assess, which should be access, both in terms of infrastructure and to content, so access to knowledge. Within the discussion of access, I like to frame the issue on net neutrality, and it's also related of freedom of expression, which is another topic that we must assess when thinking about internet regulation. And finally, privacy. So I'm from Brazil, and in Brazil, those topics are being discussed in different regulations and policies or draft bills. So if we talk about access, we have now the National Broadband Plan and also consultations, access in terms of infrastructure here. So also consultations about regulating the quality of connection and of service, and another consultations about competitiveness in the telecom market. In terms of access to content, we are passing through a reform on our copyright law, which has been quite polemical because there has been a change in the government, and we can assess that later. But also in the internal relations, we are trying to push questions of the development agenda within committees like WIPO. In terms of privacy, there is going on also a discussion about a draft bill on data protection and the discussion on the civil rights-based framework for internet in Brazil. Those both regulations are like complementary. One is specific to ISP liabilities and the other is specific to personal data, sensitive data, and so those regulations are being has one nature that's quite the contrary of the actual discussion on the cybercrime law draft bill that's going on also in the country. To assess freedom of expression, to address freedom of expression on the net, also the civil rights-based framework deals with this topic in a contradictory manner as the cybercrime law. And also, one thing that we have to have in mind is that all those three previous topics must be crafted in a way that we still reassure an innovation-friendly environment for the internet. So it's a difficult balance, and I think to be very productive to discuss this, how to achieve this balance, how is the experiences within our countries for that. So this is just a brief context about Brazil. And just to mention, we are trying to do that in Latin America to compare the regulations. This is one case of filtering practices studies in Latin America, in which we selected a few countries: Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, and Mexico. And we tried to make a table comparing those laws and mapping those laws, most important, to be able to see how each country is addressing those topics. So we map laws that deal with right to connection, net neutrality, hate speech, because we are dealing with freedom of expression here, and copyright, child pornography, blocking, and notice and takedown mechanisms. So I wanted to bring that just an example as a case study that we could develop better. So I'll pass the word to Pedro.
Okay, thank you very much for the timely intervention. I will give a short overview of which is the regulatory environment in Spanish-speaking Latin America. As you will see in the presentation, we identify basically four main areas: freedom of expression, privacy, copyright, that includes also all the issues related to safe harbors, and also intermediary, that could be seen not only on the side of privacy, but also as a general question of any kind of content. And the fourth one is net neutrality, open access, and broadband. We identify more or less more than 20 different legislative or regulatory initiatives. So as you can see, the region is quite active in addressing the different issues that deals with internet regulation. In terms of freedom of expression, I will give a little overview of each of those, but one of the biggest highlights on this, something happened with the remote.
No, the power just went off.
Oh. No, it's that. No, it's the lamp. Well, okay, here we are. Someone might need to reboot the remote participation, but should we continue or wait till? Huh? Where is the remote moderator? Sorry, the remote moderator? Who is the remote? Okay.
I'll go to the IGF secretary.
Okay.
Actually, maybe we could fix it here.
Because I don't want to proceed without having the remote participation on.
Yeah. Okay, Pedro, I'll go get some.
Okay, thank you. I will stop the timer.
I assume we're quite passionate here, so if we're going to lunch, it's okay. Actually, we're locking the doors. You can't leave until the session's over. We've got a lot to deal with.
Joana, no era Carlos. ¿Eh? ¿Sí? Are we all set?
You know what, I'm going to log in and I'll do it from a personal account. So we can have it through without trouble.
Ginger. Thank you very much. We are super lucky that we have here Ginger Paquet, that is one of the most experienced remote moderators that the IGF has.
I'm glad you're giving the proper importance to remote
Yeah,
participation, because there actually might be more remote participants
than present.
there are here in the room.
So for those remote participants that might be listening to this, hopefully, do we have the connection? Okay. No, well.
Might never start
They
working.
should have, Pedro,
Yes.
they should actually be receiving the webcast.
Yes?
They just can't participate in the chat, so they should be
Okay.
able to follow, and we can catch up and chat with them when they,
Eh,
we can continue.
Should we make a hashtag and then they can ask us on Twitter or
The
something?
hashtag is workshop, and the number.
Okay.
WS and the number
¿Qué
is
número?
the automatic.
79,
Okay.
79 es.
IGF 11, and then also the workshop number is the Twitter, is the.
Okay, well, we will continue. Hopefully our remote participants can listen to us. Sorry for this. We have a problem with the electricity here. So we will continue with this revision of which are the main topics in terms of regulations in Spanish-speaking Latin America. So we start with free expression, and the highlight of the year has been the joint declaration of the Rapporteur of Free Expression from the Americas, the Organization of American States, from Europe, from Africa, and from United Nations, that they released a joint declaration on free expression and the internet. They set for very interesting precedents in terms of intermediary liability, net neutrality. They address many of the issues that we are going to see here in different countries addresses at national level. In terms of free expression, at the end of 2010, there has been a lot of debates in Venezuela, and there has been a law known as Ley Resorte, which address the issues of internet content, intermediary liability, and also tied some sanctions to ISPs for user-generated content that have raised a lot of concerns in the human rights community and freedom of expression advocates, and the Organization of American States Rapporteur on Free Expression released a press release jointly with the UN Rapporteur expressing concern about this law. On the field of privacy, privacy is one of the most active issues in Latin America. As you can see, there is ongoing work in Mexico, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Costa Rica, and also Mexico is going to be the location of the World DPA conference, which is all the data protection authorities are going to meet in Mexico to discuss the future of privacy in terms of legislation and regulation. Privacy has a very interesting dynamic in Latin America because Latin America is in the middle of two very important economic markets. In fact, it's in the middle of three, because we can say that you have in the east you have Europe, and in the west you have Asia Pacific, and also in the north you have North America. So the developments in terms of privacy has been always influenced with the discussion on trade. So sometimes many of the discussion related to privacy come up in the middle of discussions of free trade agreement executed with Europe, or in trade discussions related to APEC or other forums that deals with trade issues. So this is something interesting, and it's something that it needs to be addressed in a way that there is no a single model that LATAM will follow. We think that it's going to be a hybrid model between European standards, North American standards, and Asia Pacific standards that will suit the best the interests of the region in order to not only protect users but also improve and attract investment and business in the region. The third biggest issue has to do with copyright, safe harbors, and intermediary liability. We saw developments basically in Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, again Argentina in other issues related to digital levies, and Paraguay. Main issues, one of the latest things that happened has to do with Mexico. Mexico is one of the countries that right now is negotiating ACTA, and the Senate took a very affirmative step in order to send a clear message to the executive branch, telling them that if the executive branch goes forward in the signing of the ACTA agreement, the Senate will reject that action. So it's a clear message from the Congress to the executive branch, and they made a lot of criticism about the non-transparent negotiation process of ACTA. In terms of Colombia and Chile, they are revising their copyright law. Chile has been the first country in Latin America passing a huge copyright reforms that deals with internet issues, and set up the first standard for notice and takedown in Latin America. And they decided that the standard that suited the best the legal tradition of Latin America has been a standard of judicial notice and takedown, in order not only to address the concern of the copyright holders, but also protect other rights that are recognized in the in the Chilean constitution. So it's a way to balance this judicial notice and takedown, the analysis of the different human rights that collides in the internet environment. Then we have developments in terms of copyright levies, something copying basically the models that happen in Spain. It has been a lot of criticism in different countries about this because it might increase the cost of technology and access of technology in Latin America. And we lost power again. Are we still connected? No.
I'm still connected, so
Okay.
I'm watching as
Okay.
well.
Well, I will continue.
We have redundant systems.
Okay, great. And then there are other developments that has to do more with a broader scope of intermediary liability, and address this issue from a general standpoint, very similar to the European Directive of Electronic Commerce, where it's not just focused on copyright. That is the case of Argentina, for example. The fourth largest group has to do with net neutrality, open access, and broadband. Chile, again, is leading in the region. They enacted the first net neutrality bill, the first net neutrality law in the world, and they already also enacted the corresponding enacting regulation, and the law it's already executed in the country. It has really focused on information for the users, and there is a general provision of not discrimination of content. Many other countries are following the Chilean model in Latin America. We have 2 bills presented in Argentina, a reform of the telecommunication law in Colombia as well, addressing net neutrality, and another bill in Colombia and in Uruguay also following the model set forth in Chile. In addition to this, there are projects that has to do with the recognition of access to broadband as a human right. And this has been, for example, passed as law in Peru. And also in Colombia, there is right now a bill in the Congress addressing this issue. So this is, just to give you an overview of the complexity of the policy work that is going on in Spanish-speaking Latin America. One last note about this has to do with that many of our regions, we are really far behind in terms of internet policy and internet regulations. So all this happened in a little bit more than a year. So imagine more than 20 projects in more than a year. And this is because we need to start to basically catch up with the lack of proper regulation. And this regulation, what will help, if it's good regulation, is to develop the internet ecosystem and get more people online, get more business online, and get more possibilities for access and growth. Well, I will pass right now the floor to Eduardo Bertoni, who will address specific issues in Latin America, one of the core issues on intermediary liability. Eduardo?
Thank you, Pedro, and thank you very much to Joanna, Pedro, for the invitation to join this panel. As it was said in the presentation of myself, I'm the director of the Center for Studies on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information. It's an academic center founded in 2009 at Palermo University Law School in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So it is not Palermo University in Italy. I always clarify that because my last name is Italian, so I'm not in Italy, I'm in Argentina, I'm Argentinian. The goals or the objective of the center is to provide rigorous research and studies to sectors of civil society, journalists, government, institutions, and the academic community that are dedicated to the promotion of freedom of expression and access to information, primarily in Latin America. As part of, I don't want to say more about the center. I have some information. Joanna, if you can put this information. But as part of our academic work 2 weeks ago, the center hosted the regional workshop Freedom of Expression on the Internet, Regulatory Access in Latin America. This workshop was within the framework of CELE's project that we call Freedom of Expression on Internet, which aims to explore the impact of internet regulation, case law, and policies in the region on the right to freedom of expression. The topics that we are working were ISP liability, internet filtering, retention and protection of personal data, and defamation and jurisdictional problems. The pool of participants to the workshop was made up of professors, scholars, and experts on internet law and regulation from different countries in Latin America, including Brazil. Joanna, Carlos, and the Fundación Getulio Vargas were there with us, Chile, Peru, Colombia, Uruguay, Puerto Rico, and Argentina. The local participants represented a cross-section of the legal community, including professors, practicing attorneys, representatives from the judiciary, and representatives of non-governmental organizations. The prominence and diversity of participants contributed to an open and rich discussion of topics that were addressed at the workshop. The papers presented at that workshop and its recommendations and conclusions will be soon available in our website. Since I was asked to discuss in this panel the liability of ISPs, let me mention some of our preliminary conclusions. Of course, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, but the idea is, and I totally agree with Pedro Les, that, and as I said in other panel, there are not many regulations in Latin America, but there is a movement to start the regulation. And what Pedro just mentioned is very clear, that we need to be aware that something is going to take place in Latin America soon. So even though we don't want to reinvent the wheel, after our workshop, we try to put some conclusions and recommendations that came through the papers that were presented in the workshop. Particularly, as I said, on ISP and other intermediaries liability, the conclusions or recommendations, or the preliminary conclusions and recommendations are that participants first agree that in Latin America, regulation on ISP liability is scarce. Responsibility of intermediaries should be regulated specifically. Other conclusion is that it is recommendable that regulations be unambiguous. When regulations are unclear, they may incentivize intermediaries to remove content for fear of being considered responsible for it. Specific regulation on this topic requires consideration of the rights and interests in place in each area that could generate responsibility of intermediaries, such as the areas of defamation, child pornography, or intellectual property. A general regulation that attempts to cover all of these areas may be inadequate. For penal responsibility or criminal responsibility, although we are against criminal responsibility, when somebody is thinking on it, it is imperative that any criminal regulation adheres to the fundamental principle very common in Latin America. Consider internet a risky activity, like driving a car or managing an atomic central from electricity, and this is very, very, very problematic. Intermediaries can be exempt of responsibility under the notice and take down model. However, regulation under this model should consider that notice are judicial, that the creator of the content to be taken down is notified, and that a simple and expedited judicial process should be pursued in all cases. And finally, the study of the obligation of intermediary to take responsibility for the removal content is advisable, as this could be carried out arbitrarily, discriminatorily, and without due process. As I said, those are preliminary conclusions that we expect to have more discussion in the future in Latin America, particularly with policymakers, particularly with those in people that in the countries that Pedro Les mentioned are working on regulation on this area. Let me finish with a clear example of what is going on in some countries. In my country, in Argentina, specifically, when we don't have regulation. And this is the case of more than 100 of injunctions that prohibited, injunctions issued by judges that prohibited search engines like Google and Yahoo to Google or to search for particular names, most of them celebrities, that went to the justice system and say, okay, my name is, when it's Google, is leading to a site that I don't want to be directed. And instead of initiate cases, judicial cases against the sites, they initiated the cases against the Google, against the intermediaries, Google and Yahoo. Why they did that? It was very clear for the lawyer. It was just one lawyer unless now there are more, but I think there's one lawyer, and he think that it was easy to go behind the intermediary than to go to go against the websites. The judges are not applying freedom of expression standards, and this is what I want to highlight in the finish of my presentation. When they decided to issue the injunctions, in most of the cases, not in all of the cases, they didn't apply, for example, the different threshold that the Inter-American System on Human Rights applied when a freedom of expression issue involved public person or private persons. So they are not applying freedom of expression standards. The decisions are in some situations contradictory. The first decision granted damages that was initiated was repealed in a court of appeal, and now we are waiting for a decision in our Supreme Court. The time is over, and I apologize that I have to leave the room at noon because my plane is departing. Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you for staying with us until last minute. And now I will pass the floor to Alex Cominas, who will address the perspective of the challenges of regulation from an African standpoint this time. Alex, your floor.
Okay. Thank you. If you could put that little timer on, it would be great. I'm Alex Komnenos. I'm an independent researcher. I'm also a PhD student at the University of Gießen, and I've been sent here through NEPAD, which is the New Economic Partnership for the African Development, and the Southern African IGF. I think that in Africa, it's different in every country. Obviously, it's a huge, huge continent, many regions, but there has been a developmental focus and a developmental thrust to internet regulation, and the communications regulators have tended to focus more on telecom regulation. This is understandable because we're still trying to connect many people. If I give you the example of my region, Southern Africa, aside from Mauritius and the Seychelles, which are particularly very rich countries, which have about, Mauritius and the Seychelles have 24 and 41% of internet users respectively. Kenya comes next with 20.98. Afterwards, that's a big drop to South Africa with 12.3% internet users. And then most now are under 10, and in fact even under 5. Some countries like Madagascar have 1.7%. So we are still struggling we're still struggling with the access issue. The access issue is the most important issue. And there's been great strides made in mobile. Obviously, many people, most people, the majority of people didn't have landlines. This was a completely foreign thing. And what happened has been described as leapfrogging, in that you leapfrog you leapfrog one particular step to go to a kind of supposedly higher technological step like mobile. So we jumped straight to mobile. While that's a good thing, we can't neglect our fixed line infrastructure. Backbones are very important. We've got a lot more fiber cables than we used to 2 or 3 years ago. I think we'll have about 12 by the end of 2013. So yeah, access has been very important, and I think that the next leapfrog that is possibly going to happen is the mobile internet. Is that people, well, throughout the world, by 2014, there's supposed to be more mobile internet users than fixed line, or more correctly, internet over computer users. So that is a great developmental opportunity for Africa. And what I believe, what we want to do is to make sure that those who access the internet just from a mobile phone are given the same quality of access as those accessing from a computer. So whereas mobile phones have applications that, smartphones in particular, have applications that can allow you to do amazing things, We also want to see smartphones with applications that allow people to do stuff that we need for basic economic development. I'm talking about word processing, writing CVs. I don't know if any of you know a good smartphone app for word processing. I don't know one. So, and then I think net neutrality comes to the fore there, because on the mobile internet, operators tend to want to decide what services they would like you to use much more than they would on the fixed internet. Now, if you speak to many regulators and internet service providers and mobile operators about net neutrality, they'll tell you that you're being very silly and naive. And I can see a bit of the argument when you have limited resources, limited broadband. You do want to slow down certain services. It's a normal thing, shape services. But what we don't want to do is to encourage people to use certain platforms on the mobile phones. And I would call it to create a new divide between the mobile phone and the computer. So there has been trends recently where there are Facebook offerings you can get from your operator, a certain amount of a certain amount of Facebook free or unlimited Facebook, a certain amount of free megabytes on YouTube. And then, of course, there's BlackBerry Internet Service, which is quite popular in some African countries, including South Africa. And while it makes great economic sense to use it, we want to avoid the danger that certain services are encouraged and certain services aren't. Recently in South Africa, Vodacom tried to say, no, BlackBerry Internet Service is not actually unlimited. We'll slow you down after you use 100 megabytes. So that's the primary issue that I want to bring, both from an analytic and from an advocacy perspective, is that we really need to ensure that the mobile internet is a quality experience. There's a lot of issues, and I'm sure my colleagues will deal with it, but cross-border connectivity, I think, is another very important thing with regards to telecom and internet regulation. And there's really a lack of frameworks for dealing with what happens if I want to lay fiber from South Africa to Namibia, or if I want to make a connection there. Usually we have to connect to each other through sea cables, or go to New York and come back again. I think we need to think how that would be regulated. And I think it's quite hard unless you have two fixed line incumbents connecting with each other that both have state approval. You can add that also cross-border microwave links and stuff like that. So that's an important issue that we need to work out. The other thing is, a lot of the times I access the internet in Africa. If you do a trace route, you see I'm sitting in South Africa, I'm visiting a South African site. Sorry, a trace route is a command you can run on your computer to see the different IP addresses that your request to visit a website hops through. And you'll often find that the thing goes to either New York or Europe and back. And I find if I want people to access my websites faster in Africa, I'll host the thing in California, which is quite unfortunate. So we want to encourage the development of internet infrastructures in Africa, servers, data centers, and another important thing is internet exchange points. And an internet exchange point is when you have two ISPs sharing resources and requests, so that if the one ISP can help you retrieve a web page without having to leave the country. Now that requires some regulatory thinking. And just to end off, there was a slogan we were using at the Southern African IGF, which is keep local traffic local.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for keeping with the time also. And well, we are starting to see a lot of similarities in Latin America and Africa. Now I will give the floor to Lillian Nawala, who will address another points of view from Africa as well. Lillian, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. I'm going to try to be brief and try to pose questions to the participants, because I think the issues that we are facing as Africa and Latin America seem to be the same. And my first question would be, if we could just sit and reflect on what kind of internet do we want in our regions. Do we want affordable, reliable, fast internet, or the opposite of that? And if these three issues is what we want, how are we going to achieve this? When we talk about internet regulation, before we even talk about regulating the internet, we first have to identify what kind of internet we want. So just in response to what is the way forward, how can we achieve the internet that we want? I'll not go through most of the issues because I think Alex has touched some of them in regard to access and affordability, but we may want to first invest in infrastructure development in order to address the issue of access, because we will not jump into regulating the internet when we cannot even afford to have it. And then on the issue of mobile internet or connectivity, I think this is the in thing. But again, when you look at the devices that are used to access internet, these are expensive devices which cannot be afforded by the everyday person. We are looking at the underserved communities, the rural communities. So we are calling for a reduction in the cost of ownership in these equipments. We also need relevant and implementable cyber laws. I'll tell you that in my country, in Uganda, and I think at the East African level, I know in Kenya, we do have cyber laws, but people are not aware of these laws. The everyday person is not aware of the existence of these laws. You find that when you look at mobile money transfers, we've had cases in my country, and I think it's the same thing in Uganda. I mean in Kenya, where someone does a mobile money transfer, and somewhere within the period of the transfer, the transaction does not reach the other person. But then what does the law say about this? What does the service provider say about this? This person doesn't know where to go, doesn't know that, oh, there's this law on ABC, I can go and report. So if we are talking about internet regulation, we need to know these are the laws and this is how they can be accessed, and they're available to everyone to access them. Then, of course, on the issue of privacy, security on the internet, yes, we are excited that we are able to connect, we are able to experience these fast speeds. I'm speaking from the East African region. We have the cables in our region, but then how are we using them? I mean, we've seen people taking on social media, but how do we define content? Because the issue of content comes in. How do we define this content? What is it used for? I mean, there's a lot of hate speech, going on. How do we define what is hate speech? What is the behavior? How do we control users not to expose too much of themselves? Or how do we get them to write without attacking each other? What does the law say? I know maybe we'll hear experiences from my African colleagues who are here about their different laws, because I did not go into that area to try to see what's happening in every country. And then on the issue of freedom of expression, again, we go back into we look at how do we protect user rights. I'll give an example. There are conflicting laws. I just did a research 2 months back on Tanzania and their freedom of expression. And yes, the Constitution says this is an area that we agree upon, but when you go, these other laws that are supposed to lead towards to that are somehow conflicting. There's no press freedom, those kind of issues. So how do we address freedom of expression vis-a-vis the internet rights and the issue of government protecting content referred to as classified content? And I'll also give just one more example as I try to summarize on the social media, because I mean this is the way in which we are seeing citizens trying to participate online and address some key concerns within government. I'll give you an example. We had attempts, I think, 3 months back when there were demonstrations in my country, and the government tried to block access to Facebook and Twitter, but the ISPs did not respond. So I don't know. The way forward is we try to have this multi-stakeholder engagement. If we have the laws, let's try to bring in all the stakeholders to work together, be it government or the ISPs or the users themselves. And also, I think the awareness creation about the existence of these laws to the everyday person, because these are the guys who are using the devices. And also, maybe one thing we could do is try to capture best practices. Say, in Latin America, this is how it's done. How can we implement it in Africa? Or is there a country that provides a success story in this? And yeah, I think, thank you. I'll just leave that to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lillian. And our last speaker is Alex Gakuro, who will finalize this round of presentations and also addressing some of the challenges that we're facing in Africa. Alex, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think with the speaker saying so many things that are important, I take the easy opportunity to just summarize and touch on a few issues, starting off with the issue that Lillian has just mentioned of Uganda, of Facebook, when it was about to be blocked and nobody was speaking. Indeed, it's an issue that arose at the Freedom of Expression conference that happened in June in Johannesburg, where Google, Electronic Frontier Foundation, Committee to Protect Journalists, and Global Voices Online invited online writers, bloggers, and journalists who are threatened all over Africa to try and map ways of how to protect online expression. And the case of Uganda arose. The point I want to use that case to bring to the table is that in Africa, and I do believe in Latin America and other developing countries, and I think even the whole world, is that the telcos, there is really not much competition in that area. I think America has about 3 mobile networks. If there are 4, but they are merging. So competition in that regard is so few. And so what happens, what has become a reality now is that you have to be politically correct to be in that area. And therefore you have to toe the line of the government or the powers that be in whatever jurisdiction you are. And now the question that arises here in terms of public interest, who really is actually minding the public interest? Because maybe the ISPs in Uganda couldn't speak because if they spoke, their license would be revoked. Mobile operators have to do whatever it's supposed to do, regardless of how much it violates expression rights of the people. Now, I'm just using that as an example to say that in terms of the practice, must look at ways at how we are protecting expression for what it is, that is a public good. In Africa, there are very few countries that have any laws, regulation on online content, let alone on copyright, intellectual property right, defamation, child protection. It's still a very gray area. Add the burden of electronic records or evidence being admissible in court, big problem. And then the burden of proof of that evidence as being real. You take a flash drive or a computer, or you say it was on a website or a screenshot, problems upon problems. And I want to say this is not just an African problem. Even in the US, they are very careful when they are dealing with laws that have to do with technology. Judges in the US say you either show your stupidity by taking some of these software and technology cases, or you want to show your smartness. So the point is, as we discuss internet governance at this place, and we should know around the world is a difficult area for people that are newcomers. When you look at a country like Kenya, I have an unofficial count of the people you could call ICT lawyers. They are less than 15. It's unofficial because I keep it. Now this raises questions when we are then saying we are participating at global internet technology forum, which are by nature full of lawyers from developed countries that are there advocating for the rights of their corporates. We have a problem. Because then the issues of public interest, things like culture, things like traditions, things of natural heritage, which are of significant value and of public interest to us, have nobody to look after. We have few in government that are actually the ones to advance this agenda. So I question even our participation in some of those fora because we do not have people that are probably well prepared to address those issues. Now we find, we will be told the fora is open. Just in an earlier session here, I was saying some of those forums are open and closed because you must be over 10 years old in those forums. You must, to be listened to is a usual suspect. They have their lawyers and they have all it made, and then they say we are open, but indeed it's open and shut because even participation itself, you can't fund your participation, yet you are competing your participation with corporate presidents and vice presidents who are paid to even volunteer in so-called work groups. And when you're a volunteer yourself, you are having to fund your time, your travel, and when you go there, you have to actually then face with those people. And if you are not funded by an international NGO, in which case you may have to carry the opinion of that NGO from the developed countries, so you're actually not representing your local views because you must conform with what is happening there. You're not really representing the African view. On the net neutrality, I'm just touching on several issues. We also have problems where we are having certain features of services or devices being crippled. So you find, if I could just give a simple example, if a phone can have a Skype facility, and then it can compete with a voice telephony. So the operators disable, I don't know whether they work together with mobile operators, so that you don't make a Skype call or similar services to somebody abroad because they want you to make use of the expensive one. We have eVideo. Do you know the service called eVideo? The service is so the technology is so good, you can actually use SMS, you can on multi-channel at the same time, just like you have ADSL, but the operators make sure they're only going to allow one on internet. So you have to have myriads of devices where one would have been just sufficient. So the operators are doing this because they don't have public interest at heart. They only have their own corporate bottom line maximization going on there. Now, moving on a bit to freedom of expression, you find that yes, as I wind out, you'll find that the domain ratio in Africa, in the world, is about, for every 90 domain names, for every 90 people, there's one domain name. In Africa, the ratio is 10,000 people per one domain name. And then you find in Kenya, it's 2,500 per one domain name. As of June this year, Africa contributed only 2% of the global web pages, only 2% of the content online. This means that we don't have presence online, and we do have a problem in terms of the expression that is being put online. It's not African. We need to do a lot to make sure that our presence is online, and so that we can be represented and we can say truly the internet is representative. Thank you very much. Oh, yes. Thank you. Okay, the final thing I want to touch on is one that is extremely dear to me, and that has to do with issues that have to do with some developments happening in some of the countries in the jurisdiction, and I'll in particular talk about America. How come that a country can be allowed to make a law that has impact on all other nations? Under whose jurisdiction does the Protect IP intend to act? You know, if one country in America will pass a law that will take down a domain name anywhere in the world, what gives it right is a question I want to pose here. What gives them right that they'll stop Google searching a certain website, or Yahoo, or Bing, or for that matter any site, because they want to stop that site because it's, for some reason, one country decides that it infringes on certain rights of that one country? I want to ask that question because if we are going to allow that as an international community, it then means the much touted innovation, openness, and access, and all those things are really not true. They are not going to be realized at all. And Africa will continue being pushed into the digital plantation in this era of technology, just like we have always been a source of raw materials, of labor. In this connectivity era, we'll go into the digital plantations era, and it will carry with us several other people from other areas. So we don't like that. You look at popular names, common names in Kiswahili, and do a who is on them. You'll find those names were registered way back in 1992. Pick Safari, pick any Kiswahili name you like. The names are ours, but they are owned by other people. Our language. So again, comes into the issue of ICANN and UDRP and other issues that have to do with resolving disputes on domain names. We do need to have mechanisms that address our problems. We don't want to participate at international fora, be it IGF, be it ICANN, be it wherever they are, or WIPO, but the net effect of our participation is nil. Nothing is resolved to our interests. We just go there to authenticate or rubber stamp decisions that are already made, but we have to come out strong. So to conclude, because there are many issues, I think there is a case here for a south-to-south group being formed on internet, where we look at all the issues that are dear to us, whether it's a caucus, whether it's a lobby. We don't really want to define what it is, but all the issues that are important to us, we put them on the table to all the institutions, to all the governments of the world, to all the UN agencies, to all ICANN bodies, and any other European Union, anybody that we feel threatens our interests. And this is the way we can advance our interests in the region and to ensure that public interest overall is not taken a backseat. Thank you. I know I've taken a minute and a half.
Alex, thank you for your intervention, and I would like to thank all the speakers for the great interventions. I think that everybody learned a lot today from those interventions. I'm going to open now the question for the floor, but before, I would like to do a little wrap-up on things and similarities that I encountered from the different regions, so we can work on those. So it was agreed that access is one of the biggest challenges for both regions. The difference has to do with, in Latin America maybe, there is still infrastructure for access, but we are trying to get better connections, and in Africa still there are many places that there is no access. And it's another similarity is mobile usage. Both regions are very heavy users of mobile, and we are jumping from directly to mobile in many cases. So the need of good applications in the mobile area is fundamental to the access to ICT in our regions. Another thing that we discover is that both countries suffer from discriminatory mobile broadband plans that don't allow you to use the full extent of the net. So you get sometimes mobile broadband plans that has very good rates, but lets you only access to a little part of the internet. Maybe only the most popular services, and that's all. And this is against the openness and the open architecture of internet and this marketplace of ideas, where the better ideas become the more popular. Another issue is lack of cyber awareness. And we can see this at different levels. We can see this in the users, in the teachers, in the family, in the judicial operators, the judges, the legislators. There is a very important need to start to do trainings on this, train the different stakeholders on the nuances of cyber law. We also identify that our legal communities with expertise on these issues are tiny in comparison with other developed countries. We have as many of us are professors or have a lot of contact with academia, and we know that there are few universities with full programs that really address the issue of internet regulation or cyber law. Need to work on that as well. Another issue to basically highlight as a similarity, it's also the lack of a strong civil society movements in the different regions that are not branches of civil society groups from other developed countries, that they are started as locally and knows exactly the nuances of the local problems. This is something that still we need to work on this, and it will need to develop in order to have a more local debate on these issues. So those are, and then we have more broad issues that has to do with in the international arena. So how basically the issues of jurisdiction and applicable law, and how this will affect, for example, foreign relations, because a given country applying certain standard on copyright over a critical internet resource that is no territorially based, may affect for basically the rights of different countries. And also has been addressed the need to be able to use the different international forums not only to speak up, but also to find out solutions to the problems. Now, please help us to enrich this debate with your comments. So the floor is open. Gentleman over there.
Thank you. My name is Norbert Bollo. I come from Switzerland, and I have a question for Mr. Gakuru. You spoke about mobile phones that are locked to specific application programs. We have this situation in Switzerland and probably everywhere also, but I think the impact is very different, because I learned to program a computer and really much about informatics by tinkering with software, which I can do on a machine like this. I can install any software I like, and I can choose to install one that I can modify that comes with source code and all that. But with the mobile phone, how will you have development if your young people cannot tinker? So what will you do to give your young people the ability to tinker with software on the devices they use to access the internet?
Well, that's a nice question, because I had the same problem of closed source, and since we are talking of openness, I think the internet itself requires open software and openness. And that would explain to you why Android, for that matter, being an open source application, is popular worldwide. It's a very popular platform even here. And so applications developed on Android are gaining more and more popularity. What I would imagine is that then more devices coming from wherever country they'll be, just like we had in another workshop, like China, where you tell them what software you want installed on your handset. Maybe it's what will give room to that, so that you can develop applications that are free and open source software. And being an advocate of the same, I do believe our people will take that, and they are taking it. I mean, you do know Kenya is good on mobile applications, and some new programs we are hoping to launch on IPv6 mobile apps. We have started on that. So we want to leverage a lot more on that, on tinkering. But in terms of the problem I was saying, we are talking about the general handsets that are available in the market, imported as is. And like you said, it's a global problem. It's there even in Switzerland, in other countries. I would like to refer to anybody interested in learning more or discovering more about this crippling of features and facilities by mobile operators and handset makers. A certain Professor Tim Wu on New America Foundation on cellular cataphone. He's got the wireless net neutrality. There is a paper, working paper 17. He explains quite in depth about the problems on the wireless network neutrality. Yeah, thank you.
Next question. Lady over there, then over there, then over there.
Good morning. I'm Stephanie from Article 19 in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you for your presentation. Mr. Gakuru, in particular, I found your discussion quite insightful. Currently, internet rights in Kenya are not part of the human rights discourse. And so there's more of a technological drive. And so what's happening now is that in terms of expression rights and access rights, we're being more reactive to situations of restrictions. And there's a very much an ingrained reactive culture. So what I'm interested to hear from the panelists and perhaps participants from other countries is, did internet's rights stem, post the technological, or was it a parallel process that came together with the technological advances? And, was it more reactive at first like it's happening here? So that's what I would like to take out from this session as we look to bring internet rights to the fore, in especially the East African region, for myself and others. With reference to what Mr. Gakuru said about public interest, infrastructure is monopolized by government a lot in Africa, in East Africa, and other parts of Africa. And so I feel that in the African context, we cannot discuss internet rights, expression rights, access issues without linking it to governance, because it's just so heavily determined by the powers that be. So any comments from perhaps the panel, both African and non-African countries, on the impact of governance on internet rights, on expression rights, and how those were overcome, and sort of what challenges came up, so that we would be able to apply them in our own context. Thank you very much.
Someone from the panel would like to address this one? You want to?
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephanie, for that. I think I'll just quickly say that in terms of public interest and internet rights, the first thing I want to say is that competition ideally is the best case, the best scenario that allows it allows best price, openness, and it allows different players to come into play other than a monopoly. We used to experience state monopolies in most of African countries, but what has happened now, we have a worse monopoly called private monopoly. This is worse because it's not democratic. They don't practice any in their hiring, in their treatment, in their unethical handling of data, privacy, and all information. They probably only care about bottom line. So we used to have a problem of, the state corporations being monopolies, but we have to worry about a new problem of private monopolies. Now, to break that, we need competition so that then the consumer choice and trust can be built among the cross-section of them. But as we see, we cannot have more than 4, even in America right now. We have to look at new models that guarantee what is called open access. Open access in the sense that any new operator can come into the scenario and into the field and start offering services riding on a common infrastructure, other than having a finite resource like spectrum or frequency dedicated to one operator. Now, I don't know whether to say I'm happy, or I actually don't know about the Kenyan state, whether it's going to be truly open, but from all indications that we have been told the LTE license will be the tender is for open access. But I pray that it doesn't end up being on a private control, because then that would be good for newcomers. But if it ends up on a private hand, it would not be very good. In terms of expression rights, I think that came later. It's only, I think, one country in Europe that I know of that even made them part of their legislation, internet rights. And that was, I think, last year. And yet, IGF started way back in 2006. I think that was the first IGF. 2006, I think after that there was 2005, there was WISIS. So these have been developments that have come later. So IGF has been effective in various other ways outside. As you also know, regional IGFs have been formed, national IGFs, and now we are also talking of south-to-south forum we might create here. So IGF success may not be looked at directly as whether they are declarations and signed, but they may be achieving a lot more than is feasible to the eye. So in terms of rights, where you can come is Article 19, and sorry, I forgot to mention Article 19 also in our workshop in South Africa. I think this is what we need, more multi-stakeholderism, not for where I go and just wear my geek hat and you don't know what I'm saying, because then the disconnect between the technology and the rights people is very different. And like Pedro said, we lack homegrown solutions, homegrown associations that stand for local needs of the people. We don't want international organizations just responding to what headquarters have said are our priority areas. So that's what they pursue. When they go abroad, they are subdued. They just are repeating what they were issued as a statement from foreign, from their foreign offices. That's what I could comment. Maybe Lillian has something to add.
Thanks, Alex. Actually, you said it also. I wouldn't want to water down or anything you say. Thank you.
Okay. Just one comment in connection with that we need to first solve the internet governance discussion in order to address human rights and other principles. I think that will be ideally, but sometimes there are things that needs to also be addressed, sometimes very fast, and sometimes we don't have the luxury to wait for solve the bigger discussions. So I think that depends will be great to be able to do that, but sometimes there are things that needs to be addressed in a very fast way. So I know that we have some people, but we would like to give the chance to the remote participant first to express their views.
Okay, I've got one comment from Seth Johnson. He's working for the ICO in New York. And he says, I think the chief problem for governance of the internet is the failure to insist on a federalism approach to statutory exclusive rights. If you insist on that approach, then we engage in a consensus united forums for an information space like the internet. Part two is you can do this and you will be disregarded until you engage with governments, because you need to stress that these rights are statutory and this is necessary to clear the air so we can go forward with interoperating and coming to consensus over to protocols and standards that empower us.
Okay. Who would like to address that? It's more a statement than a question, but thank you for that. And I will continue with gentleman over there. Then we have a gentleman over there. Let me see that. Okay. Oof, we have a lot. Okay.
Okay.
We are going to close in 7. We were going to have 7 questions. So I need that everything is going to be addressed very quickly.
I'll make it very quickly. Make it very quick. Thank you, Pedro. Some of what I'd like to do is first, I'd like to make a comment and then a suggestion. The comment is to push back a little bit on some of the things that you said, my brother Alex, because we've worked together for a long time, and I have a great respect for your position about 2 things. One is that, as you know, I caucus with a lot of the African delegates when we go to these ICANN meetings. And I think you're right. Africa and Africa's interests are underrepresented. But I rarely see Africans who go to the microphone. And I hope that will change over the course of time. Because I know it's scary, because it's scary for me to do. But I think the only way that the interests are going to be really widely seen within the broader community, which is already established, is if people stand up and make some noise. Probably not in a very rhetorical way. Less in a backward-looking way, like looking at who owns the word safari, and more in a forward-looking way. If only because it's an argument that is possible realistically, it's possible for us to win. In terms of your discussion of open source, I hear you completely, but I also heard the other piece of it that you said also, which was that competition is best. I think what we really need is more open source, more closed source, more of everything here. One of the things that has been so impressive to me is the extent to which Kenya has become a source of IP and a source of development. And I'm very mindful of the fact that Kenya's government and Kenya's people really have high expectations for jobs coming out of this. And whatever business models we choose, we want to make sure that people can get employed and can make a living doing this so that they can grow the sector. The last is the suggestion, I guess, and that is, as an outside business person who wants very, very much to work more in this region and would love to set up an office in Nairobi, the fact is that there are a number of different jurisdictions, and as a result, a number of different ministers, different laws, different practices. Given that a lot of this is new, and realistically that there is a very big diversity of capacity within government, within the legal community and other things, would it not make sense to try to come up with a common East African template so that I, as a business person, could see the area as a market and, frankly, spend more time doing business and less time trying to figure out whether I'm breaking a law or having trouble setting up my accounts? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Just alguien would like to make a comment on this. Well, I would like to highlight one thing about the last part of this intervention. Has to do with the importance of having a harmonized set of regulations. And this is something very important for developing countries, because sometimes a country individually considered is not such a big market for different companies. But if there are a group of countries that has the same set of regulations and provides a certain level of legal certainty, those sub-regions becomes more interesting from a business standpoint. and this will be this will help to attract business in internet, particularly on the internet business, where geographical location sometimes is not important in order to carry out business. So this is also a very, very important thing to think about, to work together to make more strong relations in terms of cyber law, in terms of the different needs for internet regulation, and to have standardized principles. I would like now to give the floor to someone from Latin America so we can have an even discussion. Yes, but we have 3 from Africa in a row. Yeah, but do you allow me to put a little bit of discussion from Latin America? Don't leave, please. You're going to be the next. So, thank you.
I'm from Latin America.
Oh, we have one next to the other. You're going to be after the gentleman over here.
I just wanted to mention a couple of things. First of all, I completely agree with Lillian analysis on the regulation and regarding the contradiction of the need to try to regulate something you don't have access. So it's completely irrational in that sense. And if we try to review what we have heard during this week in different workshops, it seems that statements like the less regulation, the more internet, or statements like regulation is the last resort seems to be like a good practice when we talk about a lot of things regarding access to internet. And in that sense, I want just to leave a comment and a thought among the participants that there's a huge power of sharing what we have been doing. For example, linking our situations in Africa and in Latin America has been really interesting to see the common problems and ways to think about it. But the other power, really important power that I invite to use is the multi-stakeholder model. And because when I heard Alex's comment about the lack of voices and responses in different countries in Africa, I think it's the responsibility of each one of the different stakeholders in each country to try to resolve their issues. And being access, a critical issue, is something that's not resolved outside. It's something that has to be resolved with the people, with the different stakeholders in their communities. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Sir, now your turn. Please approach the mic.
Thank you for letting me ask my question, though I was supposed to have asked in the previous session. Anyway, I just wanted to agree totally with Alex's concern about participation. And you know, what actually, I'm very passionate about the internet. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Harry Hare, and I'm the publisher for CIO East Africa. I'm very passionate about the internet, and when we talk about participation, it should be effective participation. What I see over and over again is having people coming for these meetings and they participate. But I did a quick survey on the first day of the session, and I went through different people and spoke to different delegates who were attending this meeting. And you could clearly see that there was no thought put into it. There was no strategy. People were just coming for a meeting. Yeah? One of the things that we did in East Africa was to start the IGF, the East African IGF. And the idea was to try and galvanize grassroots level participation of people who are affected by the internet, but do not get their voices to meetings like this one. But we still see that the participation that happens at this level doesn't really augur to the well-being of the people who are being represented in these meetings. So I just wanted to ask Alex, how do we get effective participation from not just Africa but developing countries in these meetings? Because if you look at the delegation from the US, they know what they're here for. They know what they want to do. They know what areas they want to lobby for. Yeah? But speak to any African delegate in this meeting, and everybody has their own issues, all ideas. There's no strategy, no nothing. So we need effective participation. How do we get that?
Well, I'm told to give a strategy how to get African and all those people together, and already they have that one. I think a strategy is it's something that people have to develop because of a common objective, because of the motive theory. You know, the motive theory, there must be something you want to achieve, and motives are not always bad. It's what motivates you. So what it requires, I think I can tie that to what Lillian said before, is you try to, America for a long time has been the center of gravity of the internet. In fact, they invented it. So they know all the good things about the internet. They know how to optimize about it. They know how to get the best about it. They have so much of it. For so long they have had it. So they have come to appreciate its value. Lillian says, how can you try even to think of regulation or even to have an agenda on regulation or even how to net neutrality when you don't even have the internet? So perhaps what we need to do is to get our people into a room and give them 10 megabytes per second. And once each of them has had it for a week, and tell them this is what you would have if you actually participate and on all the fora that actually talk about internet. And the price they pay for in America, in Korea, in Europe is so much. Why you don't have it, then you go to ask. Give them that motive, then they'll participate and say, now I see the light, and therefore these people will come in knowing, or show them content and block it. And then you tell them that's the effect of censorship, private censorship or government censorship, and then they'll get to know the issue. I think we have to handhold them and try to make them see the issues firsthand. Like, I don't know if you're a Christian, but the biblical Thomas, doubting Thomas, you just have to do some of these things, then they can actually see it. Otherwise, as it is right now, even trying to tell somebody the difference between a megabyte, a kilobyte, and what they are told that you get up to so much. You know, mobile advertisers, mobile broadband advertisers, you get up to 21 MBs per second. Little they tell you that you're actually paying per MB. So therefore, the faster the speed is, the faster you exhaust your bundles. So there's still this confusion about what you are getting. We have several issues, so we'll do that. Yeah.
I would like to respond to Harry. Harry, you asked a very good question. How do we increase participation? No. It is effective participation. During this year's East African IGF, we were looking at how to make the East African IGF sustainable. And we're thinking that, before even we start thinking of making the East African IGF model sustainable, we have to go back to the local national forums. Because if you come here and you don't have an agenda from your country, you don't know what you want to achieve, you're going to get nothing at the global, more so at the regional. So I think the focus is to adopt the multi-stakeholder model from the national process, from the national IGF. Then when you come here, you'll know you're presenting your country, and these are the issues. And again, it goes back to what kind of internet or what kind of internet governance model do you want for your country? Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Now we have a remote participation question.
Comment. Yes. Okay, it's one comment from, from Ellen Strickland. She's from New Zealand. And she's interested in Alex's idea of the South-to-South group to table issues. And she sees in this session many shared issues for the regions and wonders what others think about the idea.
It was actually Pedro's idea. He mentioned it earlier, and I just wrote some notes that suggested we open a Twitter account. But yeah, it's just the idea to start thinking about creating a caucus for IGF issues for people from the global south. So you can join in and ask to, well, yeah, try give us your contact details by tweeting with the hashtag SouthIGF, or send an email to south.igf@gmail.com. And I think we'll take it from there. We obviously have to have a virtual stakeholder discussion about what type of what this would be, what thing it would be. But let's start the discussion. Would you like to add more, Pedro?
No, everybody's welcome, and let's see what happened here. Sorry? And comment, yes, of course. So fortunately, we have been able to put this up quick. So remember, hashtag is SouthIGF, and the email address is south.igf@gmail.com.
And follow at Twitter at SouthIGF. Please, we have got no followers. We feel very lonely.
Well, next question is over there. Lady in red.
Thank you. I'm Veridiana Limonte. I'm from the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee and from Brazilian Institute for Consumer Protection. And I would like to agree with Pedro Les when he says that one of the biggest challenges in the Global South for Africa and Latin America is actually the access, the broadband access. And I would like to hear more from you about the strategies to accomplish this, because sometimes in Brazil we have discussion focused on competition, but in developing countries especially, we have a real problem about it. And sometimes the government, when acts, it's only to fill the gap in the universalization process, giving to the companies the profitable areas without thinking more about it. And I would like to hear more about you also about the strategies of participation and even a multi-stakeholder process, and how the civil society could participate on the broadband plans that are being carried out in these countries. And as for quality, I would like to see if we have more experiences in the room, because in Brazil now we were discussing quality of connection quality regulation, which imposes to the companies medium and minimum speeds regarding the announced speeds, and the companies are really thrilled about it, saying that it doesn't happen in most of the countries and we should let the competition solve this, but we don't have competition. So I would like to hear if you have experiences. And to finish my comment, they also are talking about taxing heavy users in the internet and increasing prices for those who downloads more and uses more internet, so we can even for less final consumers, so we can be in an internet that you have to pay to access and you have to pay again to really use. So I want to hear your comments about it.
I won't be able to address all the questions because of a question of time, but first, there is no single solution for this problem, and that needs to be taken into account the different realities of the different regions or countries in sometimes. But important things, help to develop solutions at a community level. This is very important. And when, for example, an ISP becomes a successful community provider, protect them. Because what happens is that we see sometimes is that someone with a lot of efforts starts the development of community services, and then an area that was isolated becomes more interesting in terms of business, and then it's very difficult to compete with bigger players. So this is something. Also, interconnection. I think that this has been addressed a lot. start to work with network access point. I think I can't remember who was to say keep local traffic. This is very important. This is also a way to take down the prices of broadband and optimize the connection. That content providers start to bring the content closer to the users as well. And this is very tight with good regulation, because no international company will put servers in a country that realize that it has no clear legal protections for that infrastructure. And that infrastructure implies protect their users from intromission of the state, protect their users for different information risk that could be. So it's a mixed bag of solutions that we need to address here. The lady? I will with you there.
Thank you. Mine is actually a question on content. Mention has been made, a comment has been made that Africa has no presence on the web. And I think this actually is a very serious issue that we should look into, because we cannot talk of having a voice on the web if we don't have content. And I think the problem we are having in Africa at the moment is that there is no collaboration between content developers, content managers with the ICT. Yeah. So these two groups are working parallel, and they continue to work parallel, because I've attended a few forums like Coding at ECA, and there has been an attempt to bring the two groups together so that we can at least do something about content. And we apart from South Africa, we really haven't done much to ensure that we have content to give us voice on the web. So I would like us to come up with the strategies of bringing the two groups together in Africa so that we can ensure there is local content on the web. I come from a University of Nairobi, and the problem we are having in the University of Nairobi is researchers accessing locally published content. It doesn't exist. And so this is something I would really like, particularly in Africa, that we pay attention to. Thank you.
I'll take 30 seconds for that. Yes, it's true, only 2% of global online. I would also like to appreciate certain development partners who have seen the need to add and have funded some small projects which we hope to be very prominent. One of them is the Ford Foundation, through a trust that I'm the executive director of, called Code IP, Content Development and Intellectual Property, a project called Asserting African Context Online, where it's a platform to get all this local content and put it online. And I also want to say that I'm fortunate to say that the government of Kenya, Ministry of Information and Communications, launched a creative content task force that has got different people. Maybe through a bilateral, I'll give you the government effort that's going on in that regard. So at least those are two initiatives which are trying to address that issue. Thank you.
So the gentleman over there.
My name is João Carlos Caribé. I'm from Brazil. I'm from Mega Now movement to maintain the internet freedom. I'm very happy to know that African countries don't have regulations, just because this is the great opportunity to make internet free here in Africa. At Brazil, we caught the problem just because they tried to regulate the internet by the jail, not the civic rights. This could be not this fault of this. The fact that the African country don't has the regulation don't be a problem. It could be a great opportunity for emerging countries. I believe that the countries don't need to sign the convention or acts with intellectual property rights attached. It's very dangerous for us. All right? Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. And I just want to make a comment around this, and maybe to specify your comment, because you are saying that the best thing for internet development is not regulation at all?
No, we need regulations, but to regulate our rights. Like Brazil is developing the civil rights framework, the civil society and some institutions like Fundação Getúlio Vargas and others works today to turn back to the parliament the civil rights framework instead the cybercrime laws. That's the cybercrime laws we saw could be very dangerous for our development if without the rights. That's all right.
Thank you for the clarification. Any other question? Are we ready to wrap up and have lunch? Okay, well, I would like to thank you, everybody, and a round of applause to everybody here. In the screen, you have all the information that will lead to a forward discussion on the net, on maybe all the similarities that we found in the South. And, well, maybe we can change the axis. So I will leave you with Joanna, who wants to do the closing remarks on this panel. Thank you all.
Just one thing, thinking about the South, I'm working on a documentary trying to deal exactly with the future of the internet with this global South perspective. That's why I was hanging around with the camera throughout the session. And it's for us to be a good initiative if you could be in touch through this Twitter and hashtags and so, and further development the movie as well, and try to address these questions in a more interactive but attractive manner to expand this debate to other publics that are not into the debate of internet governance as we are. So please join us, and then we keep in touch. Thank you, everybody, for this.
Have a safe trip back home.
I left some copies of the internet.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there are some copies in Spanish of Internet Governance from Diplo Foundation.
And I don't want to exclude anyone. You can also use this ICT and come and write your name down here for the Southern IGF. This is perfectly useful information.
Remember the hashtag, South IGF,